Joining me now is writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue. Esther, we are loving having the King and Queen here in Australia, but an interesting piece in the UK Telegraph saying that King Charles may be the first and last king to visit Australia. We'd love to know about this piece, and what's your view?
Well, this piece is based on clearly the Republican movement in Australia, seeing this as sort of hopefully the last visit from a British monarch. Personally suspect it will not be the last. Actually, Prince William's popularity is even higher than that of his father, and I suspect the throne is in good hands, being handed over to him. But it's just part of this sort of wave of republicanism whenever the monarchy goes to visit many other parts of the empire. Look, the reality is, one thing we've noticed is actually politicians in Australia, Australian politicians tend to be quite a distance from the rest of the country. So we've polled, according to Republican polling, only about 30% of the country is really in favor of abolishing the monarchy, which is actually lower than anticipated. It usually hovers around sort of 35 to 40%. So the Republican movement is actually losing steam. And so they've been using this visit by the king to try and say, actually, Australians are on the side of abolishing the monarchy. And it's not really kind of getting the kind of traction that they're hoping for. We've seen the Not My King movement follow the king from all the way from the UK actually to Australia, and some also local branches of that movement have followed him as well. But it's not really kind of gaining the same kind of momentum that was hoped. The king has always been clear that the decision of countries to no longer have the monarchy as their head of state is for the countries to make that decision for themselves. Prince William has said the same thing as well, and it's this kind of openness and willingness to just allow countries to make these decisions for themselves that really kind of sets a different tone with the royal family. It's not seen as an imposition rather than kind of a historical inheritance. And these are the kinds of things that people are actually taking notice of. And so now what we're seeing is a split between the politicians who are quite obviously Republican and make no qualms about it, and have actually in many ways snubbed the king when he first arrived, and the rest of the country that are saying, actually, we'd kind of like to keep this. Now, obviously, we have to wait and see what will happen in the next 10 to 15 years as significant demographic changes in countries like Australia potentially change the public's attitude towards maintaining the royal family and the monarchy. But so far, it seems like more of the public is on side than not.
And it won't come as any surprise to you, Esther, that Australians are more interested in domestic economic issues than they are in something nebulous like republicanism. But in the lead up to this tour, Charles had been urged to return Indigenous artefacts held in British museums. It's not the first time we've heard this sort of issue. What's the precise issue here?
Certainly not. So it's been estimated that I think over 39,000 artifacts across 70 museums in the UK that have artifacts from Aboriginal communities from Australia, and there's always been calls for reparations, sending them back to where they come from. Now, the argument around sort of sending back artifacts from museums to where they come from is an interesting one, because it doesn't really understand the context to which they get there, and actually how the public can benefit from having them in these museums instead of having to travel to the places where they originate from to be able to enjoy that and understand the history behind them and all of that. But it's interesting, King Charles has been called upon to be an ally and an advocate for expediting the repatriation of these artifacts, even though they are simultaneously at the same time trying to get rid of him as the head of state of Australia. It's interesting how you'd want him to be an ally, but only for a cause that benefits them. But the whole argument around sort of artifacts being returned is quite an interesting one. You see that for many countries as well in sub-Saharan Africa that want or governments from those countries that want some historical artifacts returned, but they actually don't hold as much significance when they return there, because the only people that get access to them are the people that either travel to those countries or are from there. You educate people better about the history of not only the where these things come from, but the relations between the two countries that have those artifacts, by having them in countries where they have now ended up. And it's quite an interesting debate. It seems more of kind of like a gotcha moment more than actually just wanting to educate people about history and having a neutral factual view of what actually happened. But it's quite interesting that King Charles is being called to spearhead this. He's seen as useful in one way, but not in the other way. And it's quite ironic, actually.
And while the King and Queen are here in Australia, Prince William was out this week. He did an interview regarding an upcoming documentary on homelessness. We've talked about it before. Here's a clip.
There will be some people who might question whether you're the right person to lead this project and its efforts to end homelessness. How would you respond to that?
I think everyone having a right to a safe and stable home benefits us all. I come with no other agenda than desperately trying to help people who are in need. And I see that as part of my role, is that why else would I be here if I'm not using this role properly to influence and help people where I can.
Now, when are we expecting this to be released, and what should we expect from the content?
So this documentary that he's done is part of his program called Homewards, which is a 5-year, very ambitious initiative to try and end homelessness in the UK. And the Prince has been very clear that this is something that he's very passionate about. He's already funded many projects across many parts of the British coastline to try and fund housing projects to end homelessness. Obviously, this is a really complex issue to tackle, because in tackling homelessness, you also have to tackle mental health issues, addiction, and all sort of the lack of social housing in Britain. But it's quite a stark contrast to how the politics of homelessness is discussed in the UK. I mean, there's one of the bigger controversies is the fact that you have people coming across illegally to Britain across the Channel on small boats that are being put up in hotels to the tune of millions of pounds a day, while you have a growing homeless population in Britain. And I think by Prince William kind of looking at this from sort of a non-toxic perspective and just saying, look, it's a public benefit to have people in safe housing, and it has positive repercussions on crime levels, for example, addiction, all of that. You really see kind of the real value of the royal family in shedding a light on issues, but not making it a very toxic political debate. Now, this is a very ambitious plan. Like I said, it's a 5-year initiative. Now, many doubt he will be able to end homelessness in Britain in 5 years, but actually, it just sheds the light on what can be done if you really put your mind to it. And it's going to be an interesting sort of initiative to see go forward. I mean, so far the public reaction has been actually quite positive. Many people are saying this is actually something that really needs to be tackled. A fifth of the English population, for example, are living in social housing. The homeless population is growing. Kids living in poverty, for example, is also increasing, which is the legacy of COVID, for example. So these are one of those positive things that he can shed a light on. You could see from the clips that are coming from the documentary that it was very lacking in ego. It was more about sort of public service and highlighting the public good that can come from ending homelessness, or at least tackling it seriously.
And one last one before we go. It's been reported this week that Harry and Meghan have purchased a European getaway. What do we know?
Yes, so they've joined the cohort of celebrities, particularly British celebrities, that are buying homes in Portugal, because Portugal has an EU sort of visa-free scheme. If you buy a property there and you spend a short amount of time in Portugal every year, which basically amounts to like a family holiday, really. We know that Princess Eugenie as well and her husband have a home in Portugal, and that the couple spent time with them. The Sussexes spent time with that couple last year as well. So it's not surprising that they're choosing to put down roots in Portugal, so to speak, as some sort of a family getaway. And it also comes after they were evicted from Frogmore Cottage, so they don't actually have a residence here in the UK. So this is one way that they can have some sort of base in Europe without actually having to be in the UK, which Prince Harry still allegedly doesn't feel safe with bringing his family over.